Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Learn with me. I'm Deborah Hanson. Today, we're going to be looking at AP Human Geography 2.2 Consequences of Population Distribution. So, I'm going to go through all the essential knowledge that you need to know to be able to be successful on the AP exam or your Unit 2 test. So, on this slide, you're going to see some of the key terms for 2.2. And as I always say, especially with AP Hug, the key terms are really the key to the five. So, you really do need to know not only the definition, but how to apply them to an FRQ or to an MCQ. It is super important. So, however you decide to do that, whether it's flashcards or Quizlet or just notes in your notebook, it doesn't matter, but you do need to know them. It's super important. I'm going to make a separate video just for the vocab words with definitions and examples to help you out. Well, with all my videos, what I try to do is use the CED questions, the learning objectives from the College Board, and then I just basically explain the essential knowledge you need to know to be able to answer those questions, because we know that the College Board uses these questions to create the exams. So if you can answer them, if you know the material that goes with them, then hopefully you do really well on the exam and you get that 5. So the CED question for 2.2 is explain how population distribution and density affect society and the environment. Let's break that down. So before we get going, just want to say thank you to everybody who's hit that like and subscribe button, who've left me comments, who sent me emails. I really appreciate it. It helps me a lot when you guys do that. I love to make these videos to help you study for the exam or your unit tests. And so if you can help me back by leaving me a quick comment, even if it's just a thank you, it doesn't matter. Hitting the like button and the subscribe, it helps my numbers and it helps more people get to see my videos. So really appreciate if you do that. Okay, let's get started. So depending on where people live, whether it's urban or rural, or how old people are, that's the dependency ratio, the younger population, the graying population, and what stage of the demographic transition model the country is in, population distribution is affected in many different ways. For example, political, economic, social, and environment. So we're going to break all of that down. Let's start with the political factors of population distribution. When studying population distribution, remember it doesn't just describe where people live. It also has major political consequences. So let's start with representation. In democratic systems, populations affect how many representatives a region gets in government. So, for example, in the US House of Representatives, states with more people get more seats. This means areas with higher population often have more political influence because they can shape more votes or policies. Next, consider resource allocation. Governments use population data to decide how to distribute funding for things like transportation, healthcare, and education. A region with more people usually receives more resources and infrastructure investment because it needs to serve a larger population. And then finally, political identity is shaped by where people live and who they live with. So cultural and ethnic groups concentrated in certain areas often develop shared political goals and movements. However, when population distribution is uneven, it can create conflicts over representations or resources. So, for example, urban areas might feel underrepresented compared to rural ones. So here's an exam tip. On the AP exam, remember that population distribution isn't just a physical or demographic concept. It's deeply tied to political power, decision making, and access to resources. Always link where people live to how that location influences government and policies. So, population distribution doesn't just affect politics, it's also deeply tied to economic growth and development. Let's break down the main ways this connection works. First, there's the dependency ratio. This measures the balance between people who are working and those who aren't, mainly children and elderly. A high dependency ratio means a large portion of the population relies on the working age group to provide resources. This increases demand for schools, childcare, healthcare, and retirement services. On the other hand, a low dependency ratio usually means a stronger, more productive workforce. So next up, employment. Areas with larger populations tend to have bigger and more diverse labor markets, more workers and more job opportunities. This helps attract industries and create a wider range of economic activities, from factories to financial services. Then we have economic development. Businesses often choose to locate where people are because that's where their workers and customers are too. So, regions with higher populations or strategic locations can attract investment, trade, and innovation, driving more economic growth. And finally, infrastructure. Population size and distribution determine where governments build roads, bridges, utilities, and public transportation. Densely populated areas need more infrastructure to support daily life and economic activity, while sparsely populated regions might struggle with underdevelopment. So here's a tip. Always remember where people live shapes economic opportunity. Population distribution influences everything from jobs and infrastructure to overall growth potential. So, we've talked about how politics and economics affect population distribution, but there's also another impact, and that's social and culture. Let's look at a few key ways this works. First, community development. Areas with high population density often develop stronger social networks and more diverse communities. When many people live close together, there are more chances for interaction, cooperation, and shared cultural experiences. Cities, for example, tend to be the centers of innovation and social connection. Next, culture and diversity. Regions where a certain ethnic or cultural groups cluster often develop distinct cultural identities. Think of Chinatowns, Little Italies, or ethnic neighborhoods. At the same time, highly diverse populations create varied cultural landscapes where languages, food, religion, and traditions mix together. Then there's quality of life. High population density can bring more opportunities and amenities like schools, hospitals, and entertainment. But it can also lead to overcrowding, pollution, and pressures on public services if resources don't keep up with that population growth. And finally, social mobility. Larger and more diverse populations tend to have more economic and educational opportunities, which can help people move up or down the social ladder. Urban areas, for instance, often provide more pathways for advancements compared to rural regions. So here's a tip to remember. Population distribution doesn't just show where people live. It reveals how communities form, how cultures interact, and how social structures evolve. So, population distribution also has a huge impact on the environment. Let's look at how where people live influence sustainability and ecological balance. First, there's carrying capacity, an important key term that you need to know for the exam. This means the maximum number of people an area can support without causing environmental damage. When a population grows beyond its carrying capacity, it puts pressure on land, water, food, and energy resources. That's what we call overpopulation, and it often leads to shortages and environmental degradation. Next, pollution. Areas with dense populations and heavy industry tend to produce more air and water pollution. Cities with millions of millions of people and vehicles release large amounts of greenhouse gases and waste, which harm both human health and ecosystems. Also, habitat destruction. As populations grow, more land is cleared for housing, farming, and infrastructure, and this leads to loss of forests, wetlands, and wildlife habitats, reducing the natural areas that plants and animals depend on. Biodiversity is also affected. When human populations expand, they often replace natural habitats with urban or agricultural land, which means fewer species can survive. A decline in biodiversity makes ecosystems weaker and less resilient to change. And finally, climate change. High population density means more transportation, more energy use, and greater carbon emissions, all of which contribute to global warming. Population growth intensifies the demand for fossil fuels and other non-renewable resources. Here's your tip. Remember, high population concentration often leads to environmental strain threatening sustainability. On the AP exam, connect population growth to resource use, population, and habitat loss to show how you understand human environment interactions. So that's all the information you need to know to be able to explain the CED question, explain how population distribution and density affect society and the environment. So if you found this helpful, please hit that like and subscribe button for me. Really appreciate it. Leave me some comments. Also, that also helps me. I appreciate you doing that for me. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.